11 browse. Treading water that they drowning. My head on a swivel. Yeah. It's only really my surroundings.
Hello and welcome to episode 186 of the Smash Accept podcast. I'm your host, Michael Royer. You can find me on Twitter at DynastyDadFF. Joining me is one of my absolute favorites in the industry. We've done a ton of different collaborations. You're going to be able to find this on his podcast as well. The one, the only, Dynasty Zoltan. How you doing tonight?
What's up, man? It's been a minute. Been a pretty crazy first month or so of the season, but great to be back on the Smash Accept pod and have you back on the Dynasty Zoltan pod.
Yeah, I mean, like we were doing this in the off season very regularly. Right now, I mean, obviously, your Patreon has been fantastic. I know you guys are doing a lot with the analytics, really trying to check things out with people's teams, and I'm excited to hear what's been transpiring with you and how that's been going, and as far as like how you're seeing things progress.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And back at you, obviously, most people listening on the Smash Accept feed know all the great work you've been doing on your Discord and through the Patreon and stuff. It's been a lot of fun and it's been a wild start to the season. I'm excited to talk about some of these top 12s. I can tell you this is my third in-season rankings update, and it's been by far the hardest one, particularly at some of the positions we're going to discuss. So it's been fun.
I think the interesting thing this time of year, and we really get into a dynasty mentality, is I like to break my season into quarters. And I know you kind of do similar type things. Is I look at weeks 1 through 4, and I really want to see. And when people DM me, I'm like, hey, let's let it play out a little bit. If you're in a little bit, if you're in a rebuild situation, you know what you're doing from day one. In a punt or a rebuild, which we've covered extensively. But how do you look at? We're going into week 5. We're going to be into buys. That's why I really say that first quarter, because you know what you have, right? Like you can see what's there. How do you talk to your subscribers and people that message you about, what kind of way do you look at your success? I mean, there's some guys that message me, hey, I'm 2-2, but I'm number 1 in points. Other people say, hey, I'm 4-0, but I'm last in the league in points somehow. Like, it's an interesting time where you really got to choose a direction, which is something I know you're very big on.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, what I would say is that when analyzing a specific player, it's after 4 weeks where their performance from weeks 1 to 4 is more predictive of rest of season performance than the ADP from the offseason. So after the first 3 weeks, offseason ADP is still more predictive. Now we're getting to a point where, all right, Raheem Mostert has been awesome. Kyron Williams, Puka Nacua, these guys have been incredible. It's time to adjust. And even guys like Dallas Goedert and Pat Freiermuth, who have been underachieving a little bit, it's time to adjust with them as well. Darren Waller as well. So we're getting to the point where more than 50% of what you can expect in the future is based on how they performed weeks 1 through 4. When it comes from analyzing the team specifically, first of all, I don't really care about record other than when it comes to securing a bye. Otherwise, it's all about looking at points for, because you don't get to choose the teams that you play. And also in a 12-team league, you're playing 9 of the teams once and only 2 of the teams twice. So if you're 4-0 and you're last in points, it's pretty likely that you've played 4 pretty bad teams in order to achieve that, or just gotten incredibly lucky. So what I'm looking at is, all right, if I'm 4-0 and I'm 5th in points, maybe I decide to go all in when I wouldn't have before, because I could actually secure a bye now. Even if I'm only the 3rd or 4th best team for the rest of the season, I could still get a bye. And we know getting a bye week is what you really want to achieve from your regular season. So I still lean towards overall quality of the team. I still like to be very objective when looking at it. And that's why my diagnostics model I really like. But it's definitely a time to look in the mirror. You're a third of the way through the regular season. You can really get a great sense of your team so far.
And I love this because this is something that when you ask this type of question, you could phrase it in 2 sentences, but we could also fill 6 podcasts with this, because I have so many people. They're like, hey, I'm 3-1 or 4-0. I have 5 firsts. Is it time to move in? Like, where do we do these? These are things that you and I both, break down in our Patreon. So if you guys want those kind of things, hit us up. But what we're going to talk about first is the position that is the most volatile, and this year more so than ever. I mean, Mike, we're looking at the way that the top 12 running backs have shaken out. I have maybe half of them are the same area that they were to start the season. And this position has become, for me, and over the years, I've really moved into, I'm building around young wide receivers. I'm building around those quarterbacks in my startups, and I'm buying production. But the running back position right now, I mean, I know you put out a series of polls today, and I'm interested to dive into them. But the running back position outside of Bijan Robinson and Christian McCaffrey has been crazy to try to predict, right? Like week to week, we love Breece Hall, we love Jonathan Taylor, we love Jahmyr Gibbs. It's not really happening. Kenneth Walker's look great. Devin Achane out of nowhere, is like guy that you and I both love. Now he's catapulted into that area. So before we start breaking down the top 10 or the top 12, I should say, the running back position just keeps changing so rapidly, and that's why I've kind of adapted that, where the insulated trades move ourselves back. It's become more volatile than I've ever remembered it.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, after Bijan and McCaffrey, who's already 27 years old, there's nothing reliable at running back. You look, even the guys like Kenneth Walker, who's getting 65% of the rush attempts, he's only running 40% of the routes. He's getting a lot of touchdown luck. And he's, a top 6, top 7 running back, depending on what you're looking at. As far as dynasty rankings, the polls that we did today, he came in 6th. And you just can't be really confident in any of these players, which is why what you're saying, you buy production at running back. It's why buying players like David Montgomery, Raheem Mostert, Kyron Williams, Zach Moss, these are cheap options that you could get for basically free, who can really benefit your team in the long run. So more than ever, I am shifting towards investing in youth at other positions and not paying up for youth at running back unless you know they're a stud. And to be honest, it's even tough for those guys because the 3 young studs outside Bijan this year, Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor, and Jahmyr Gibbs, have given you maybe 1 startable week. Like it's just not happening for them.
Yeah, and I think the tricky part is people see that name cachet and they keep saying to me, I want to buy this player. I want to buy that player. And it's like, you know what? Instead of doing that this time of year, go out there and, like you said, Kyron Williams is just – he's young. His usage is, 98% snap share. Like it's ridiculous. And he's had 3 RB1 weeks, and then you got guys like you said, Zach Moss. And I know he's going to taper off once Jonathan Taylor comes back. And like I keep saying, once Jonathan Taylor comes back, Zach Moss is cheaper than he will ever be. And I don't foresee Jonathan Taylor playing the entire year. So he becomes absolutely cheap. Raheem Mostert, everyone wants to buy Achane. Right now, Raheem Mostert is going to cost you nothing, and we've already seen what he can do. There's guys in that late first range, like the James Cook, the DeAndre Swift, that you could possibly buy. But it's become just let's invest in the next insurance running back. You and I did an entire series on that where we told you, go get Jerome Ford. He was the biggest guy on our list. Jaylen Warren, who hasn't quite popped off, but he's had some usable weeks, and we're going to start getting into those guys that are going to win you leagues because – obviously opportunity is everything, but obviously Bijan Robinson is the RB1. He got 80% of the votes in your particular scenario. People are asking me, hey, what do I do to buy Bijan Robinson? And it's like, to me, you get into an area where trying to buy Bijan Robinson, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Patrick Mahomes, trying to buy those guys, your team has to be a juggernaut, loaded with picks to try to make that. I have so many people saying, I don't have a lot of depth, but I'd like to trade my 24 first, Breece Hall and, one of my starting wide receivers for Bijan Robinson. And as good as he is, it feels like it's a trap to try to buy that kind of production.
Yes and no. I actually disagree with you a little bit there. I think the fact that the running back position is so weak after Bijan Robinson inflates his value quite a bit. Because we see guys like Breece Hall and Jahmyr Gibbs, who are such tantalizing talents. Neither of them are like even startable. Like they maybe are flex options. If you look in terms of expected points per game right now at the running back position, Jahmyr Gibbs is in 27th. And Breece Hall is outside of the top 40. So what we're looking at is there's just a huge hole. Bijan Robinson is already incredible. He's not even getting all the work that we know he's going to get and the work that he's deserved. And he's already putting up big fantasy weeks. He's 13th in expected points per game. He's 10th in points per game, and he's 21 years old, and this offense hopefully is just going to get better. So while I typically am not investing in young running backs like a lot of people are, like I might have used to be doing, Bijan Robinson to me is an exception there. That being said, I'm not super confident trading 3 firsts for him, but there are definitely teams where I would consider moving Jamar Chase for him. I would consider moving maybe like a Trevor Lawrence for him. I'd probably want a little something on top, but I have a lot of these teams now where CJ Stroud was my third QB.
Yes.
I can now move CJ Stroud up a slot and maybe I can sell Trevor Lawrence.
I keep referring to the podcast that we did in the offseason, but I mean, CJ Stroud was another one where we're like, make sure you get him everywhere. I got him at 106 in almost every league, and it's like he's my QB3. Now he's already a top 8 to 10 dynasty quarterback where you have maybe 12 at the latest, where you have an opportunity now to make some of those moves. But you're right. I mean, Bijan Robinson, the question you and I had was, how many targets is he going to get? He's third in the league in targets with 22. You know, like he is getting some of that usage and the carries aren't even quite there. You know, so once that starts happening, sky's the limit. So speaking of sky's the limit, the guy that you have to have is Christian McCaffrey. I mean, I think every year I don't have him as my dynasty RB2. I have him as my 3, you know, but I think Christian McCaffrey, I mean, he just put up 54 fantasy points this week. Like he is a league winner as long as he is healthy. This is the number 1 running back in football, period. I've been doing weekly rankings in the Patreon and on Twitter. I'm not even going to consider anybody else, you know, like he is the RB1 every single week. My question for you on Christian McCaffrey is I have a lot of people saying, you know what, like I'm going to give Breece Hall in a first. I'm going to give Gibbs in a first. I'm going to give Walker in a first. My question to you is when you're buying someone like that, like there is a timing for buying Christian McCaffrey, right? Like you have to look at your certain scenarios. I struggle paying up to get a guy that's 27 years old because if McCaffrey gets hurt, that value goes from second round startup to what, 4th, maybe, fifth,
lower than that.
So we get into an area where it's like, if Jahmyr Gibbs goes down to injury, if Breece Hall goes down again, okay, they're going to slide back a little bit, but the age has a lot more insulation.
Yeah, I mean, what Christian McCaffrey's been doing this season is insane. He's averaging 30 points a game. Whether or not that keeps up, who knows? But we know he can be averaging 22 plus a game. And really, Austin Eckler is the only running back who's done that in the last 3-4 seasons, other than McCaffrey. And McCaffrey's 2 years younger, obviously healthier at the moment. I would not give up anything on top of Breece Hall. I do have Christian McCaffrey as my RB2 right now. I have him in a bigger tier. We'll get to some of the other guys later. But I did actually just offer Breece Hall for Christian McCaffrey straight up in a league today. I'm at the point where if you are a contender, I'm willing to make that deal straight up. However, I would not be adding a lot because, like you said, there is no floor for a guy like Christian McCaffrey. And even in this year that's been disappointing, we know Breece Hall is an incredible talent, and he's proven it even in these difficult circumstances. It's just not translating to fantasy points yet. So I'm not willing to do something like that for Christian McCaffrey. I'm almost more willing to say, let's put in one late first if I'm a contender this year, and then maybe a promising young receiver like Quentin Johnston. That can be my second late first, and then we can get Christian McCaffrey that way when I basically know what I'm giving away. But I'm certainly not giving Breece Hall and anything of value to get CMC.
I like that. Breece Hall comes in as the RB3. I had him as my RB2. Obviously, I mean, when you have him on the field, I mean, he's gone up in carries every single week. He's gone up on snap share. You look at what the Broncos are giving up, and basically they are a sieve. This is Breece Hall week for me. I feel like this is your last opportunity to buy before he explodes because the yards per touch are there. They're still top in the NFL. You know, the Broncos gave up over 30 fantasy points a game right now. They are going to be giving up that to Breece Hall. Breece Hall is, you know, you and I had this in the offseason where he was our RB2. I've kept him there. I can see taking McCaffrey in that same area, but I'm all in on Breece Hall. You are as well. We've talked about him in the past. Where's the tier break for you in the running back position? I mean, for me, I have Robinson by himself, and then I have McCaffrey, Hall, and Taylor. I've moved Gibbs down one. So we have Taylor as 4, Gibbs as 5. How do you see those top 2-3 tiers breaking out for you specifically? Not the Twitter poll that we did.
Yeah, for sure. So for me specifically, Bijan in a tier of his own. That one's pretty simple. And then I do have these next 3 guys: CMC, Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor. that is my next tier.
Mhm.
If you want to move on to talk about Jonathan Taylor, I'm down to do that. But that's where my next tier ends, because those are the guys that I believe can be bell cows and are young. Obviously CMC excluded. The next guys on this list, I mean, we'll get to Achane. Like, obviously, he's shown a lot. There's still some question marks there. I don't have question marks about these guys, and especially hearing Jonathan Taylor is going to come back this week. I think he should be right up there in the top 4.
Yeah, and that's where I flip-flopped. I moved him there. My next tier, I have Gibbs, Walker, Etienne, Achane, and Pollard. Pollard maybe slightly down a tier. Actually, I do have Pollard down a tier, but I have those 4 guys. I think Gibbs, we've seen what he can do, but it hasn't panned out. I mean, we were talking about, I wouldn't give a first. I recently traded Gibbs in a second for Christian McCaffrey, and I'm okay with that on an all-in contender. Walker has been phenomenal. We thought Charbonnet was really going to eat into that. Etienne, a little bit up and down. Achane's the interesting one, right? Like, you and I have had a lot of dialogue back and forth. Snook has him as RB9. I've moved him to RB8. I know other people are putting him up even higher because what he's done in 2 games, you have him as RB6.
RB5.
RB5. Woo! See, and I thought I was being, I was getting on the ballsy side. What he's done in 2 weeks, and I know that's a super small sample size, but the things that he's done, right? We knew he could catch the ball in space and make things happen, but he's getting red zone carries and looking fantastic. McDaniels is putting him all over the field, and this is a supreme weapon, what we want Detroit to be doing with Gibbs, but they don't have the same idea of how to use him, right?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's pretty simple for Devon Achane. He's showing everything that we wanted Jahmyr Gibbs to be showing. And yes, he doesn't have that first-round draft capital, but let's not pretend that Achane wasn't a really talented player in college. And he actually handled a much larger workload than a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs did in college. He was 93rd percentile in terms of his target rate. He had 196 carries in 10 games his junior season. That's almost 20 carries a game. He's going to be able to handle a large workload despite his size. And of course, this season, he is first in yards per attempt, first in yards after contact per attempt, first in missed tackles forced per attempt, first in explosive run rate. He's just been absolutely incredible. He's in the perfect offense for him. We're going to see all of his usage increase, as it of course should. And even when you look at, he's basically only played 2 games this season. And if you look at last week, he played 66% of the snaps to Mostert's 41%, and he had 68% route participation. Raheem Mostert has been, a top 5 surprise of the NFL season, and Devon Achane has made him a backup. So I am completely comfortable putting him number 5. I would be comfortable taking him over Breece Hall. I'm not doing it yet because I think Hall is just a much more superior talent, but Achane is younger than Breece Hall. He's going to outscore him this season, and nothing I've seen makes me think he's a worse talent. I know it's only been 2 weeks, but this hasn't been flukes. He's been incredible.
And I think one thing I've been saying in the Patreon a lot is I would take, because right now most people aren't where you're at or where I'm at. They still have him. I was on a major website and they had him as RB18. Catch up a little bit. What we have to look at is you can still get in a lot of your leagues Achane plus for Etienne, plus for Walker, plus for Gibbs. Like, you're going to be able to get yourself an area where I think you can get a second on top of all of them. In some leagues, you might be able to add a third and get a first on top, which is an absolute smash. And I think, he belongs in that tier. Kenneth Walker, Etienne, Achane. Who do you have as your 6th then?
Yeah, and just referencing the Twitter poll briefly, Achane came in 8th place. So like you're saying, I'm a little high on him. I think people are going to start to catch up. I mean, one more 20-point week, and I don't understand how he can be outside the top 5. Number 6 for me was pretty easy decision. It's Jahmyr Gibbs. I'm wearing a Jahmyr Gibbs jersey right now. It was tough not putting him number 5. I'm just going to have faith in the talent. It sucks how he's being used. It's a similar situation to Breece Hall, but it's the same reason I had him below Breece Hall coming into the season, was that we saw 6.5 very good games of Breece Hall in the NFL last year. I've liked what I've seen from Jahmyr Gibbs this season. I think he's looked pretty damn good. However, I don't think he's going to be used this way anytime soon. And It's concerning. I mean, we saw what DeAndre Swift, how he was used last season and how he's not being used this season. And there's no reason to think that Jahmyr Gibbs is going to change. He only had 14 snaps last week. That was his season high, not including the week that David Montgomery was out. Again, only 8 rushing attempts. It sucks. But Jahmyr Gibbs is my number 6, and that's where my tier ends.
Okay. And then I want to move into the next area because that's where, I mean, we have those guys in similar areas. I want to talk about 9 through 12. We haven't gotten that far in your poll. I mean, Pollard went at number 9. I think I have Saquon Barkley at number 10, and it looks like he's currently winning that next poll. And then I have Eckler at 11 and DeAndre Swift at 12. But James Cook and Josh Jacobs are definitely part of that. Shout out to Jacobian for turning us on to James Cook. He's definitely someone that I've come around on. DeAndre Swift is the question I get the most right now, right? Like, we know what he was capable of doing. We were maddened by what's happening to Gibbs. That's the same thing that happened to Swift. Now in Philadelphia, getting this type of volume, like, this is a guy where I'm comfortable buying in on DeAndre Swift again. Am I being fooled though? Right? Like, that's what everybody says. It's fool me once, shame on you. Or fool me once, shame on me. Or fool me twice, shame on me. Is DeAndre Swift fool's gold? I am a firm believer that rest of schedule, he's top 5 to top 8. And if that's the case, as a 24-year-old, maybe revitalizing his career.
Yeah, I couldn't tell if you were quoting George H.W. Bush there, trying to do the actual saying. But yeah, it's tough with the DeAndre Swift because he doesn't have any contract security. Yeah, his contract's up after this season. They gave basically nothing to get him. At this point, I think he's locked in to be a starter somewhere next year. And like you, he's a top 10 guy the rest of the season. I have DeAndre Swift coming in at number 11 for me. Okay. So I do have him in this top 12 just to round it out. 7 through 10 is Kenneth Walker, ETN, Pollard, Jacobs, and then I have DeAndre Swift coming in just ahead of Saquon Barkley because I think Swift outscores him the rest of the season. And I've always said, if a guy's younger and he's outscoring a guy, you better have a damn good reason to have him behind in dynasty rankings. So I got DeAndre Swift coming in at number 5. I'm not paying more than a, playoff first for him because we've seen how things can go wrong, but I am comfortable paying that price.
Well, and we looked at it. I mean, everybody was starting to say, hey, let's start looking into 2024 because the 2023 late firsts were not good. You got A-Chain and Laporta there at the end of that all the time. You know what I mean? You were getting those kind of guys. So let's not do the same thing for 2024. Those mid-firsts, I know you've started digging deep into the 24 class. Those mid-firsts are going to be just as valuable, if not more this year, going into it. So if you're looking at something in that 109 to 112, I think that's a smash if he's someone that puts you over the top, and gives you a little bit of depth. If you had to pick one running back outside the guys that we just spoke about that is going to jump into that top 12 or has the potential. I mean, I know you and I were both big on Javonte Williams. He unfortunately got banged up again, and I was predicting this was going to be his week, and we saw what McLaughlin was able to do. So I think that would have been Javonte Williams. But if you had to pick one guy outside the top 12 right now that we listed, who would that be?
Yeah, and it's tough to see. Javonte Williams honestly wasn't even playing that well. He did come back early from an injury, but my guy's going to be Tajay Spears. He's a guy way down on this list. We actually mentioned him in one of our preseason podcasts as a potential huge riser. He's played 50% of the snaps this season, and he's run 50% more routes than Derrick Henry has. The Titans are about to enter a massive rebuild. Tajay Spears is a dynamic, explosive player who can play on all 3 downs, and we haven't seen any running back in Tennessee take any type of snap share or workload from Derrick Henry, and Spears is doing it. I think he's the starter next year. He's going to get a huge boost in the offseason to top 15 status, I would bet. I currently have him at RB20 just because he's not giving us that much this season, but on a rebuilding team, he is my number 1 running back target right now.
That's a great call. I like that a lot. A lot of people were on to Kendre Miller for that, but Kamara is still there. That's another guy that I think has that type of potential, but maybe not necessarily for this year. I feel like it's cheap to say James Cook because he's like right there. The way that he's played has
I have
blown
him
my
number
mind.
13.
I
have him 13, so I thought that would be cheap to say, but yeah.
Yeah, I know that it's right there, but 5.3 yards per carry and getting the goal line work and getting, 14 receptions at this point. Like, he is what we wanted other people to be in Buffalo. And it was just a great offseason buy. Let's move to the quarterbacks. I think the running backs were, again, what the biggest takeaway from that is buy the cheap production when you can. We'll start buying some of these vets a little bit later, once we get moving on. But let's talk about the quarterback position. So obviously the top three have not changed. Obviously Mahomes, Allen, and Hurts are right there. I have moved Herbert to 4 and Burrow down 1 just because they were right there anyways. But before we get to your polls, I want to get your thought process on Joe Burrow right now, because you and I talked last week where I traded CJ Stroud in a late first for Joe Burrow. I feel like that gap keeps closing, but I think Joe Burrow right now, as crazy as it sounds, I did not have any shares before this week. I went out and bought 3 because the talent is there, but the value, like, people are starting to panic. He's not by next year on a rebuild. He's a top 5 quarterback. Like, that's where he belongs.
What were those trades? I'm curious.
They were all just slight moves. Like Trevor Lawrence in a second. The other one, like I said, was CJ Stroud in a first. And then I gave up Bryce Young, Quentin Johnston, and a second. So I'm okay with those kind of moves. Like, I'm not trading one of the big guys to scale back off to him, but I do feel like the talent on Joe Burrow belongs in the top 5.
Yeah, I traded Lamar Jackson straight up for Joe Burrow on a team I'm transitioning to a rebuild today. I have the same order as you. The only swap I made since preseason was moving Herbert above Burrow just because of the production the rest of the season. Mm-hmm. But yeah, Burrow is an obvious buy. I mean, we saw 2 years of him being essentially an MVP candidate. He's tied to at least Jamar Chase long term. And listen, I'm not going to say that the last 4 games are more important than the 2 full seasons that he had before them, when he was putting up 4,500 yards and 34 touchdowns, right? 2 straight years, 4,400 yards and at least 34 touchdowns. So I'm going to lean with that. This season, he has 38 points in 4 games. He had more than 38 points in 4 individual games over the last 2 seasons. This drop off is clearly injury related. There was a good breakdown that QB School did on he's just unable to go even to a second read because he's so scared of getting hit. He has no mobility. If the Bengals lose another week, I could see them shutting him down. This could be a complete throwaway season for the Bengals, and we could see Joe Burrow back at 100% strength next year. I might wait for that to go all in buying him, but I will be buying him a lot because we know what type of player Burrow is, and that's a top 5 quarterback for the next decade.
Yeah, and I think we talk about it a lot, and I know you do as well, is like making trades at the right point. So I drafted Lamar Jackson in Smash Accept 9, I believe it was. Traded him for Dak Prescott in the first. Then I traded Dak Prescott in a second for CJ Stroud at the 106 and another 24 first. Then used that 24 first with Stroud for Burrow. If you do the math on the cascade there, it's Joe Burrow in a first for Lamar Jackson. So it's like being able to take the right timing and move things is just what it's all about, and moving things around. You would have been able to buy Herbert plus, for Burrow at one point. Herbert looks fantastic. Obviously, he's injured. He's our number 4. Burrow's our number 5. In the poll that you did, Lamar Jackson is number 5. I have him at number 6. And crazy as I have it the exact same. I have Lamar Jackson and Anthony Richardson in a tier of their own at 6 and 7. I want to hear what you have to say as far as Anthony Richardson, because people are asking me, should I trade Richardson for Trevor Lawrence? I said, absolutely at this point. I think Anthony Richardson's ceiling, oh man, where could you see him being by the end of the year? If he keeps this up, does he enter the same tier as Herbert or Burrow? Does he pass Herbert if he stays this way? This is where the insulation comes, right? Like, if you believe in him that much, would you trade Herbert for Anthony Richardson in a first right now?
Richardson has been incredibly impressive to me, and I've always thought that the number one thing that Richardson has to prove is that he's an NFL quarterback, because we know that the rushing output will be there, and it has completely been there, even more than I think a lot of people thought, which has just been incredible to see from Richardson. I think I have Richardson at number 6, so I'm clearly almost there, but I do have him a tier behind Herbert and Burrow. I'm okay if I can get a significant ad, but I'm not doing it for a random second. I still think there's risk there. First of all, I do think the injury risk is high. I still think there's a lot to be seen as far as his upside passing the football. It's been awesome. I mean, he's put up 22 points per game so far this season, but he's also set records in terms of rushing touchdowns. That's not sustainable. So I'm going to hold off on moving him up into that tier 3. But he's damn close, and he's my QB6. So I can totally see him there.
And it's been fun because he's made Michael Pittman and Josh Downs both viable.
Yeah.
Like Michael Pittman has had a resurgence, and Josh Downs, I know you've been huge on, is a huge dynasty buy. Like I'm seeing people buying him for late seconds, and I would be doing mid seconds across the board the way he's been playing. But let's talk about that next year because this is where it starts to get a little bit interesting. So the Twitter poll has Lawrence 8, Stroud 9, Tua 10, Murray 11. I have Lawrence 8, Tua 9, Kyler 10, Fields and Stroud 11 and 12. And then, I mean, Kyler Murray, we know once he jumps back on the field is going to, instantly, we've said it all off season. Like I've been buying him everywhere. He's going to be there, but let's start breaking some of these guys. Tua has been phenomenal. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Where do you have him in your ranks compared to these other guys? Because I think Lawrence has struggled. Stroud has been great. Tua's been great. Fields, horrible for 3 weeks. Looked great against the Broncos, but that's created a window where if you don't believe it, and I put a thread out there, if you believe in him, you could still buy him cheap. But if you don't, now is your out.
Yeah, I still have Tua. I have Tua as my QB7. I have him above Lamar, above Lawrence. I'm confident in Tua. I don't know. There's nothing more that I need to see other than him not getting any concussions because he is paired with probably the smartest offensive mind in the NFL right now. If you were to ask me, he is paired with 4 of the fastest players in the NFL right now. I've seen that they have Mostert, Achane, and Tyreek Hill have the top 7 times in terms of speed. Jalen Waddle is not slow either. I'm not worried at all about Tua. I have him at QB7 in a tier with Richardson and then Lamar Jackson and Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence is another guy where all of the advanced analytics are incredibly high on him. He's number 2 in big throw percentage, only 3 turnover worthy plays, number 2 in PFF grade. He's right up there with everyone. It's just that his receivers are actually being pretty terrible so far. Calvin Ridley since week 1 has been awful. Their offensive line hasn't been very good, but I'm not worried about Trevor Lawrence. We're going to see him come around. And then I have Stroud a little tier below Trevor Lawrence, but pretty much right there. And Kyler to round out. I guess that would be my top 11. And then 12 is tough. I actually want to get your opinion on 12.
Yeah, I mean, I have it as Fields. Like that's where I'm at.
Me too.
But then
me too. But it doesn't feel good.
It doesn't. But then you look at what else is there. So my next tier down, I have Deshaun Watson, Bryce Young, Jordan Love, Dak Prescott, Brock Purdy. It's like I avoid that tier. Just to be honest, I own none of that tier. What I go the next tier down with the Kirk Cousins, Jared Goff, Geno Smith. I do have a couple shares of Purdy, but I kind of get into that area where I'm like, I want these guys that I'm going to pay less for Kirk Cousins, who's going to be a top 10 quarterback all year long.
So what are you paying? What are you paying for Justin Fields at this point? And is there a specific build that you're looking to buy him on?
So what I on the thread that I put out, for me, I'm buying him on a rebuild if somebody's willing to insulate with it. If I'm moving off of Lamar Jackson, because I've seen Lamar Jackson for Justin Fields in a first, and I would smash that because I think you're going to get similar type ceiling play, but then you're going to have some opportunities to sell. Like when he has these 40-point games, we saw what he did in the past where, week 1 through 4, he was absolutely abysmal, 400 yards last year. He was a cut candidate. This year, through 4 games, he's at 870 yards. So that's almost double, 7 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. That's better than what it was. I know that's not sexy, but we haven't seen the rushing yet. And that's where I think the Bears coach is fired after this Thursday night when they lose. And someone's just going to be like, okay, I want a job at the NFL, so I'm going to trust Justin Fields to do what Justin Fields does. So I'm buying, and I know I've been bullish, and I even saw in a couple of your tweets, like you put a couple things about Fields, and people were like, dad's rolling over, but week 4, he went out and did it, and I think you're going to get some ups and downs, but I think right now that's where I'm at. It's like, I would add to Deshaun Watson. I would add to Bryce Young. I would add to Jordan Love. What I've been telling everybody to do is if you're not comfortable with Justin Fields, sell him for Brock Purdy plus. Sell him for, one of these guys, insulate get the production from a Kirk Cousins, from a Brock Purdy, from a Geno Smith, and do it that way, because a lot of people are worried, and I get that. Like I'm not someone who worries about that kind of stuff. Like I've always been. When Tyreek Hill got suspended, I'm going out and buying him. And when something happens and a guy struggles, and I believe, I buy in. That's why I have so many shares of Jalen Hurts. That's why I have so many shares of Josh Allen, and Justin Fields has been that guy for me. So I'm still there, but it's scary right now, right? There's no contract, and it's not like Kyler Murray, right? We were talking about if Kyler Murray were to leave Arizona, he's going to start somewhere else. Justin Fields is getting to an area where he's not winning. He's not looking good. It's just fantasy production. So that's kind of where I'm at with that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. One thing you said earlier is you would trade Lamar for Fields in a first. Lamar is typically valued around 3 firsts. Mm-hmm. Does that mean that you value Fields around 2 firsts, or how do you kind of?
I would pay that? So in the Patreon, guys have been asking, I would pay a late 24 and a late 25. I wouldn't pay 2 random 24s that have an opportunity to be in there, but I would do it that way, if that makes sense, where it's not quite 2 firsts. It's like, because I look at the 25 not being the same as the 24. So it's like a 1.75 first is kind of that area. And like you said before, I would probably look at it as if I have some 1-year punts where I have like Quentin Johnson's my wide receiver 9, where I might do that plus a first to get into that area, because we've seen some of the things from him, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. I acquired Fields recently for late 24 first and second. It's a team where Joe Burrow was my QB2 and Kyler Murray was my QB3. So now I'm looking for a QB2 replacement. Fields, I still think, is going to give decent production. I mean, he's averaging 18 points a game. Obviously, a lot of that was in this last game, and he hasn't even started running yet. So I'm in a similar place with you as Fields. He comes in as my QB12.
Well, and I think Twitter really creates an echo chamber where people are just so out on a certain player that everyone becomes out. And I like to zig when they zag. I like to move into those areas, not for a guy like Daniel Jones, but for a guy like Justin Fields. I'm in. Daniel Jones has been my biggest dropper. That offense is scaring me, but we've hit our 12 for the quarterback position. I want to move over to the wide receivers. The wide receiver position has been interesting as well, but not at the top. I mean, the top, I want to move over to what you have. Obviously, Justin Jefferson on a historic pace. He's the wide receiver 1. How much of a gap now, based off of, Chase is still, in that tier. How much of a gap is there between Jefferson and Chase now for you? And then I'm not sure if you have, Lamb or AJ Brown or Amon-Ra at 3, but then how much of a gap is there between 2 and 3? Because people are asking me, what do I do with Jamar Chase? Like, there's a struggle here in Cincinnati.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think there's a gigantic gap. The community agrees. Justin Jefferson won 94% of the vote for the wide receiver 1 on Twitter. I don't think you could get 94% of people on Twitter to agree on anything. So that says a whole lot about Justin Jefferson. To me, the gap is quite large. I think it's a borderline first. I'd consider paying a late first. To me, it's the difference between a top 5 receiver, a top 3 receiver, and a top 3 receiver of all time. And I think that's what Jefferson is tracking to be, right up there with Jerry Rice and Randy Moss. I don't need to wax too lyrical. Right. We all know enough about Justin Jefferson. To me, the next gap is more interesting. And I still do have Jamar Chase number 2 in a tier of his own. What about you?
I still have them in the same tier, but I think you bring up an interesting point there where if you're rebuilding and you have Jefferson, would you take Chase, and what would that pick have to be on top of that? Would it have to be like 107, 108? Or we just, because we've talked about Jefferson, and I know I've come to you on some where I've had loaded teams where I gave up Zay Flowers, JSN, and Kincaid for him, and that actually looks pretty good now. Is it like Bijan Robinson where we're just buying someone who's just so much better than everyone else?
I am probably not if I'm moving Jefferson for Chase, I would need a first that has the upside to miss the playoffs. So if I'm looking at a team that's 3-1, but they're 6th in points for, maybe I would make that move. But more likely, if I'm trading Justin Jefferson, I'm probably downgrading farther past Chase, or I would then go and trade Chase again, because I want the ability to absolutely dominate the trade. You don't get that by getting Chase in the 108. You get that by trading him for Jackson Smith-Njigba, Sam Laporta, and Kyler Murray, right? Like that's the type of trade that you can look back on and say, I doubled my value.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm just not trading Justin Jefferson. Like I know he's ruining your tank because he's too damn good, but there's someone in your league willing to overpay, and I'm not moving him unless someone overpays because he's going to be just as good next season and the next 6 seasons.
What I've been saying to everyone, and I know you say you have Chase in your own tier. My next tier is Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and A.J. Brown in a tier there. Those 3 guys, where if I'm moving off of Chase, and if I can get a second on top of any of them right now, if I'm a contender, I have no problem with that. A.J. Brown's been the wide receiver 1 over the last 2 weeks. Amon-Ra St. Brown has been fantastic. CeeDee Lamb is still in that area. Is there anybody else? Like, is that how you would operate that? Or how are you moving around? Because Chase is just a hot button topic right now. It's like just because of what's happened in Cincinnati and the way Burrow's played and the way his injury goes. I mean, if we switch to someone else, it's a tricky situation.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that Chase is going to be a guy that I'll be buying a whole lot of with the likes of CeeDee Lamb and A.J. Brown, because I think there might be a time later this season where that gap is a second or less. My next tier has one additional player in it. Actually my wide receiver 4, and that's Chris Olave. I'm super high on Olave. He had his streak of 40 plus yards of every game in his career broken. Unfortunately, after 19 games, he was second in NFL history. Olave has been incredibly unlucky when it comes to touchdown luck. In expected points per game, he's 10th, just behind Jamar Chase. I think he's just an incredible receiver. I have him right up there with CeeDee Lamb and Amon-Ra St. Brown and A.J. Brown. That rounds out my tier 3.
I like it. My tier 3 is, since I have that there, is, I mean, I still have Garrett Wilson and Waddle not that far behind. Where Chris Olave is talent wise. Waddles remains my biggest buy. Like, people are so out. He's wide receiver 56 right now.
Yeah,
and I think
can we talk about him? Are you worried at all about Waddle? Because we've seen some year 1, the Dolphins were an absolute mess. Waddle set the NFL rookie record for receptions, and his average depth of target was like Jackson Smith-Njigba level. Last year, Jalen Waddle absolutely blew up. His ADOT was 18.1. His yards per reception was 18.1, if I remember correctly. And he was amazing doing that. Now it seems like he's taken a backseat to this running game, and obviously Tyreek Hill. He looks like the 4th option on the team. Are we at all worried about Waddle and the whole idea that Tyreek Hill has 2 years left? When he retires, Waddle is going to step right into that role. Are we worried about that at all? Or do you believe that his talent is the same as Olave and Garrett Wilson? Because I think he is a kind of half tier down when it comes to talent.
I think the offense makes him a little bit. Yeah, he does not have the same talent as Garrett Wilson. Like, if Garrett Wilson was in this Miami offense, we're not even in the same stratosphere as what we're talking about. So I think some of that is aided by where he is. I think he's a very high talented player. I think he's a top 12 wide receiver, but I think we move him up a little bit because he's in Miami, knowing that, if Tyreek Hill were to go down, he's going to be a top 5 to 8 wide receiver on the year. But I mean, I understand what you're saying, because the running game, it was bad when it was 1, but now that it's Mostert and Etienne, it's like, ooh, they're definitely eating into that, and they're eating a little bit into what Tyreek Hill's production was. Tyreek Hill, week 1 and 2 was phenomenal. He's going to be right there. I mean, he's in the wide receiver 1, discussion. But
and to push you a little bit on that, if you have Christian McCaffrey above Jonathan Taylor, why do you have Jalen Waddle above Tyreek Hill?
That's a great question. It really is.
Because I actually, and I'll let you think about that while I talk for a minute. I have Tyreek Hill above Jalen Waddle at this point because I look at it and I say, listen, maybe Taylor only plays 2 more years. Maybe it's 3 more years. But if Jalen Waddle isn't giving me top 8 wide receiver production, the 16, 15 points that he's giving me isn't that hard to replace. And Tyreek Hill's 24 points are going to win me leagues over the next 2 years. So I have them in the same tier. My tier 4 is Wilson, Hill, Devonta Smith, and Jalen Waddle. Obviously, it's team dependent, but I asked myself that same question when I did my rankings earlier, and I said, I don't have an answer. So I switched.
Do we look at it like, and I mean, you're absolutely right. We look at the young, sexy wide receiver names that we don't quite see at the running back position because of the way there's a couple of those at the top. And like I said, the middle class of the running back position has like disappeared right? Like after we're doing our rankings, after 5, we were like, maybe this guy, maybe that guy, maybe this.
Yeah.
And we see that a wide receiver, we talk about that age cliff at 29 all the time, as far as not production, but as far as value.
Yeah.
And then you see where Tyreek Hill is. And you're absolutely right. I mean, if you came to me and I was a contender and you offered me Waddle for Tyreek Hill, I wouldn't take it. Like I would want Tyreek Hill because he's going to win you the league. So I'm coming around. Like we just did a redraft show with Joe Arrico, who's a fantastic guy to follow. But we were talking about in the redraft community where Devontae Adams was starting to be discounted like that. Keenan Allen, these guys, there is a real possibility that guys like Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, and Keenan Allen have a Larry Fitzgerald type trajectory where they're cheap right now. Like a lot of people have them outside their top 15, some of them having even later. So that's a great question. I mean, I love that because we just kind of test each other a little bit. I'm glad you said you have Higgins, Devonta in that same area. The guy I want to talk about next that you just can't talk about wide receivers and not talk about is Puka Nacua. I have moved him all the way up to 13, and I got a lot of trash talk about it. But what he's done, just like what you have HA moving all the way up to 6, Puka has put up numbers like we've never seen. So, we talked about ADP matters. At this point, it doesn't. Like what he has done over the first 4 weeks of the year of the season just haven't been replicated. And I know Cooper Kupp comes back, but I think he's still looking at a guy that's a top 20 wide receiver minimum the rest of the way if Cooper Kupp is healthy.
Yeah. So who do you have 10, 11, 12?
Higgins, Smith, and DK Metcalf.
Okay.
I'm a little higher on Metcalf than some, but I think there's a debate between Puka and, Stephon Diggs. There isn't a lot in that early teens that I love. I mean, you start to go with, you got production if you like Adams and Kupp. You got youth if you like, Brandon Ayuk, Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. There's a lot of money to be had if you can pick the right guys in what I say is that teens, that 13 to 19, 20 range, which I think is a big tier worth like that mid-ish first.
So why do we think that Cooper Kupp's going to get his role back?
I didn't say he was. I'm just saying when he comes back, at minimum,
for
Puka
sure
moves as they'll both, I think, because of the way Matthew Stafford is playing, I think both of them are top 20 wide receivers.
Yeah.
But I think if someone came to me today, and this has changed weekly, right? Like if someone came to me today and offered me Kupp for Puka, I would not take it. I don't want Cooper Kupp in that area. Week 1, when that happened, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I still want Cooper Kupp. Week 2, sure. Week 3, nah. Week 4, no. Not like we've seen enough. The question I keep getting people asking is Puka or JSN. And that I love JSN, but we have to at least talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I still think JSN's a more talented player, but I do have Puka above him. They're in the same tier for me. Puka's my wide receiver 11 at this point. So after Wilson, Hill, Smith, and Waddle, I have Puka, Higgins, London, JSN, Ayuk, and Diggs. That's my next tier. Listen, you just at a certain point, you have to look at what Puka's doing, and bad players don't do this at the wide receiver position. At the running back position, they do. You get guys like Zach Moss and Kyron Williams. I'm sorry, he's just not good. But
if you look at the top 12 wide receivers, only him and Nico are the only guys who are like you didn't expect to be there. But those
100%.
Guys that do it, they have made that adjustment. Those are guys that belong up there. I'm totally with you. The guy that you brought up that I'm really interested in is Drake London.
Yeah.
Drake London has gone from like wide receiver 12 to like a lot of people's wide receiver 20. The day Tyler Heineke takes over, I feel like we get an uptick in Drake London. He's one of my biggest dynasty buys right now.
100%. He probably is my biggest dynasty buy after Kyler Murray. Drake London is younger than Puka Nacua is something to keep in mind. And he has a season under his belt where he was 3rd in the league in target rate. So I am still 100% in on Drake London. I have him at 13 because listen, Stafford's not going to be around forever, but he's only 35 years old. He looks healthy. He has Sean McVay. And I'm going to have Puka Nacua because I still think he's going to put up 16 plus points a game rest of season. Like if you ask me in redraft, Devonta Smith or Puka Nacua, the Rams throw a whole lot more than the Eagles. AJ Brown is better than Cooper Kupp. So I might take Puka Nakua there, and he's 2.5 years younger than Devontae Smith. So I said earlier, if they're younger and they're putting up more points, why are they behind in Dynasty? In this case, I do have a good reason. Devontae Smith, in my opinion, is one of the best players one of the best receivers in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
Puka, I need to see it more. So I'm not going that far, but I'm pretty comfortable with Puka in that 11 to 16 range.
The question that people ask me a lot is they're worried about worried about Chase. People keep asking me, like, what's the difference between Puka and Chase in a gap?
A lot.
That's what I said. A lot of people are like, would you do it for a first? I was like, no, it has to be 2. And then even then I'm like slightly worried they can't be too late first, So there's a huge gap between 1 through 5. And then once we get to those early wide receiver 2s, late wide receiver 1s. And I think that's something that you and I both talked about there. And I really like doing this after you and I haven't talked for months. Yeah. We're kind of on the same page without even talking about it. And that really is something that makes me feel good about where I'm at. And I know you as well and our listeners. So I want to move to tight ends.
Although I'm sure if you ask my fiance, who sees your name pop up on my phone all the time, she wouldn't say we haven't talked for months. But yeah, no, absolutely, man.
Is it saved as Mike or Dad?
Right now, it's saved as Daddy because I thought that would creep her out a little bit. No, I'm just kidding. But
because it pops up on my phone, my son's like, some guy named Zoltan messaged you. I was like, oh yeah, so we'll kind of work it that way.
I got one quick trade question for you about that Chase Puka swap. So to me, I would need 2 first, or I would need a first that I know is going to be top 5 this upcoming season. Are you taking Tyreek Hill and Puka Nakua or Jamar Chase?
See, that gives you nice insulation, right? Like,
yeah, you get more production this season. Yeah. Honestly, double the production this season, and you get some youth. I think
this is the weirdest. Puka Nakua is the weirdest combination of youth and production at a value that you could have. If Puka Nakua had round 1 draft capital, we would talk about him in tier 1, if not at least in tier 2.
He would be above Jamar Chase. Absolutely. Yeah.
So I would consider that. I think that gets you into an interesting area where you get 2 guys that are going to be top 5, top 10 the rest of the way. Where Chase is
Justin Fields is actually a similar player where he has youth, he has production, but he's risky, right? His long term is risky. It's kind of similar to Puka, except obviously Puka's been a whole lot better this season. But yeah, let's move on to some tight ends.
Yeah, who do you have? While I'm pulling up your poll here, I want to talk about your specific tight end tiers, and then I'm going to pull up the poll that you did and then compare mine.
Yeah, for sure. So the poll, Mark Andrews came in first with 38% of the vote. Travis Kelce had 35% of the vote in that poll, so it's pretty close between the 2 of them. Mark Andrews is my tight end 1 in a tier of his own. I'm very comfortable with him. He put up 21 points in half tight end premium in 2021. He's over 18 points this season. He's only, 28 years old. I'm very comfortable with Mark Andrews as my tight end 1. I know I'm getting production for the next 5+ years. He's in a tier of his own for me.
Mm-hmm. So you have Andrews in a tier of his own. Who is Hockenson your 2 or Kelce your 2?
Sam Laporte is my 2.
Sam Laporte is your 2. See, so I was going to talk to you about that because I have Hockenson and Andrews and Kelce in 1 tier, but I'm starting to I have Laporte right underneath there, and it's similar. Like I have Hockenson as my 1, and I know people are going to call me crazy, but he was the tight end 2 last year. He's the tight end 1 now. Why would you have him similar to what we were talking about age-wise? He's behind. He's younger than Andrews. He's younger than Kelce. A lot of people still have Kelce as their 1 and just hasn't had the same production. It's splitting hairs when we're talking about those guys. What I really wanted to talk about was Laporta. I think I came to you in the preseason right after one of my rookie drafts, and I was like, dude, guy offered me Laporta for Waller, and I'm rebuilding. But I was like, no, Waller's going to be good. Waller's going to put up those numbers. Sam Laporta is what we wanted Dalton Kincaid to be at this point.
Yeah.
And now I'm not saying you and I missed on Kincaid because we have him everywhere. Laporta is another guy that I have everywhere as well. But where do you have Kincaid right now? And how close are you to moving Laporta? Like you have him in that next tier up?
Yeah. So I have him as my tight end 2 overall. So, and the reason is that Sam Laporta has more points per game this year than TJ Hawkinson does any season in his career other than this season. And
Mhm.
Sam Laporta, of course, is 4 years younger than TJ Hawkinson.
Mhm.
My issue with Hawkinson at tight end 1, I just don't think he's that good. And I know that's like not
Yeah.
the detailed analytics analysis I usually give, but I just look at TJ Hawkinson and I'm aware he's in the perfect situation, and he was in a great situation in Detroit. We can
Mhm.
see that Sam Laporta is doing better than TJ Hawkinson ever did in Detroit. So for me, I have Laporta above Hawkinson. I still have Pitts irrationally high. We'll get to him in a minute.
Yeah.
But
I think the
yeah,
weird
go
thing with
ahead.
Hawkinson is, and I think you and I both do this, is when we rank guys high, I have high ownership of him, and I have
Yeah,
0 shares of TJ Hawkinson. I have a
yeah,
ton of Andrews, I have a ton of Laporta, a ton of Kincaid, and a
me
ton
too.
of Kittle, but I have 0 Pitts and 0 Hawkinson.
Yeah, I actually do have quite a bit of Andrews, Laporta, Pitts, Kincaid. I got a lot of all those guys. I have a few Hawkinson shares just because I love the situation. To me, again, kind of like Nakua, he's a guy that I prefer to own on contenders because
Mhm.
he's putting up a lot of points, and I'm just not sure how long it lasts. We don't know how long Kirk Cousins is going to be the quarterback there. Addison's coming up, Jefferson's there. TJ Hawkinson's average depth of target is consistently low. He's just getting peppered with targets, and that's awesome. But I don't think a guy who's averaged 6.3 yards per target as a member of the Minnesota Vikings, which is, 22nd percentile among tight ends, that's not going to keep up if they want to win. It doesn't seem like they are going to win anytime soon, but I'm just worried about his long-term production there.
I see on the poll here, they have Laporta at 4, Hawkinson 3, Kelsey 2, Andrews 1. Then they
Yeah.
go with Pitts, Kincaid, and Kittle as 5, 6, and 7. Kittle's one of my most owned guys. It's San Francisco. If Debo or Ayuk are out, Kittle eats. If not,
Smashes.
it's like
Yep.
in this weird situation. But Pitts is what I want to talk about. Guys in the Patreon are, I mean, one guy we suggested today, we added a second to Pitts and got to Mark Andrews. I didn't think that was even feasible anymore. But people are starting to worry. They're like, do I move off of Pitts and go down to Evan Ingram? Do I try to move, what area? And the position, to be honest, it's almost impossible to try to figure out where the 12 is at. I mean, like, it's Kittle, Pitts, Goddard's disappeared. Evan Ingram's had some nice games. Pat Fryermuth up and down. Waller has been disappointing. Luke Musgrave I like a lot, but just not quite there yet with Watson coming back. I mean, it's a confusing position where you want to have one of those top 5 or not at all, and that's the weird spot. Do you have Kincaid? I have Kincaid above Pitts right now, but they're right neck and neck.
Yeah, I have Pitts tight end 3. It's a little bit crazy. I'm not going to deny that, but I look at it as at a similar explanation to why I have Breece Hall in the same tier as Christian McCaffrey, or why I have Drake London in the same tier as Stephon Diggs. I think Kyle Pitts is an incredible talent. I am not worried about him at all long term, but every week that goes by that the Falcons don't look terrible, even when Heineke comes back. I mean, Jonnu Smith is leading the team
I
in
was going to
receiving
say,
yards.
Jonnu Smith, 6 catches for like 90 yards.
95, yeah.
And we don't get anything like that with Pitts. And it's maddening after what we saw his rookie year, where you were like, this guy is a unicorn. Like, this is the next great thing that we're going to see here. It's just been maddening for me. And I'm like, I know on a lot of my rebuilding teams, I'm going to end up getting some shares because people are just getting tired of it. Like, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility to give up Evan Ingram straight for him to a contender, or maybe add a late second or something like that. Like, the value is dipping more and more.
Oh yeah, it's certainly dipping. I mean, in my poll, and again, my poll is mostly my followers. He ended up going 5, which I think is higher than what the consensus might be otherwise. You mentioned talking about, if you're a rebuilder. This has got me thinking. We've been saying that a lot, and we're talking about the top 12 guys here. If you were to do a startup right now, you could leave that startup with Joe Burrow, Kyler Murray, Breece Hall, Jahmyr Gibbs, Nick Chubb, Drake London, Garrett Wilson, Kyle Pitts. Like, all these guys are giving you nothing this season.
Yeah.
And we have all of them in our top like 6 or 7 players at their position. So
that's why
it's a
I think
good time for
rebuilders
out there.
It's going to be so easy as like people. I mean, I just got Nick Chubb for a pair of thirds.
Yeah.
And I got, Nick Chubb for Jerome Ford. And like October is redraft month. Everybody in Dynasty starts playing like redraft. And if you're in a rebuild, like this is where you can really start making some headway, buying injured players, buying guys that aren't producing, like the people that thought Kyler Murray was what you thought he was going to be. He was not going to play early. Maybe he plays by week 8, but some people are starting to panic and sell him for, get Kyler plus for CJ Stroud. Yeah, smash that. Like, go get that done. Because once these guys pop off, I mean, it's going to happen. And I think you can insulate off a lot of these guys and get yourself into an absolute dominant position.
Yeah, and it's only week 4. I mean, we're a quarter of the way through the NFL season. We're going to see, unfortunately, a whole lot more injuries. Let's get back to tight ends briefly. I do have Kincaid at 6. He's in a tier of his own. I have him after the top 5 in a tier of his own. I have Kelsey right after him at 7. And then it gets to the place where who the hell knows? Because Goddard and Freiermuth have been pretty bad. Evan Ingram's been pretty good, but again, I don't trust him really. I think Ridley's going to come around there. They've been playing without Zay Jones, which I think has helped him a lot. I have Luke Musgrave and Michael Mayer still in my top 12 just because I believe in the potential. And it's not like guys, and it's not like guys like Freiermuth and Goddard and Njoku and Waller are really giving you anything anyways. So I'm just going to go for upside. Basically, the way I view tight end is if I don't have Andrews or Laporta, Hawkinson or Kelsey, I'm just going to take Hunter Henry and then load up on, Luke Musgrave, Greg Dulcich, and, Okonkwo's.
I like Jake Ferguson too. I think he's just kind of like been a low key, just buy in there, but we're right at that 1 hour mark. This has been fun talking about like the new top 12s, really kind of going over things. So, I've had a blast. I hope that you guys did as well. Zoltan, why don't you take us home and tell us where people can find your work?
Yeah, check me out on Twitter at DynastyZoltanFF. Check out my Patreon. We got a Discord, all of my rankings, weekly waiver wire, and usage buy sell updates. Also, my Dynasty Diagnostics. I'll analyze all of your teams. And what I'm really excited about, and the Dynasty Zoltan pod as well, of course. I'm also really excited about working on a website right now. I'd say it's at the 10-yard line. Probably going to wait till after my wedding next week to bring it home, but sometime in November, dynastyzoltan.com will be live. So that's going to be really exciting to be able to bring you all that in a slightly better format than I think Patreon offers.
I love it. Thanks again for tuning in, guys, and enjoy the process.